And welcome back to the official Canyon Chasers podcast, The Braking Zone. I'm Dave.
I am Brian.
And we're here to save you from Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving week. And we imagine that right now, you probably could use a break from your uncle's politics. And so we're here to talk about something actually important and actually meaningful. We're going to talk about motorcycles. And because we've got just a ton of requests, we're going to focus this episode on answering your questions, and we got some great ones.
Well, and to start off with, I've got to say, I love getting the comments.
Oh, yeah. It's been great. And you guys are so kind. Some of the nicest comments. I've been doing this for a long time. I think we started the main channel with a really terrible video. Don't go back and watch it. I think in 2008, before I had any lights, before I had any microphones, I did 2 videos on how to remove and replace tires. Because that's what.
Oh man, you're gonna get so many vieys on those videos.
Always gonna see a nice spike of it's. Don't go watch them. They're rough. Yeah. They're pretty rough. But yeah, really positive comments. We love that you guys are enjoying this. We do this for you. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of fun doing it. But you really are our focus. So we're gonna focus on you this episode and answer your questions.
So we're gonna go into detail on some of these questions that we think are more thought-provoking, maybe deserve a longer form answer, but we do try to respond to everybody who has questions in the comments or has something to share. I don't know if we're going to get to it on this one, but on the tire episode that we did, we had tons of you that shared your experience with tires, which honestly is super valuable, I think, to anybody else who's looking at different tire options.
Yeah, we got one comment that I'm going to bring up because it really did my heart well. And the writer was from Scotland, and I'm bringing you up because I just love Scotland. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And he was saying that Continental are wildly popular up in Scotland. They work really great there. And I think that really makes the kind of the key point of that discussion really valid, that it's not just that brand A or brand B is objectively better. There's so many different things, and environment where you ride, the kind of aggregate your roads are made from. And I've been in Scotland. Those roads are pretty phenomenal. They have these, what do they call them? Single track trails or single track roads. They're basically the width of an American bike path with passing places. And so they're 2-lane roads, the width of an American bike path with semi-trucks or lorries, as they call them there, coming the other way. And you see one coming and you have to get into these little passing places so that they can go by.
Okay, so these are like hiking trails.
Yeah, it's incredible. But I absolutely just adore Scotland. It really is. I've had the opportunity to travel a lot of places, and northern Scotland, the Highlands, it's a pretty magical place.
Well, thanks for your Scotland comment. Dave got to reminisce a little bit.
I got to reminisce a little bit, yeah. And I got to gloat about how much I love your country. So
cool. So yeah, you want to start off the top of the questions?
Yeah. Do you have the? I wrote some notes.
Okay.
Let's see if I get them right here. I don't have my glasses, so I can't read my notes.
Oh.
David Ruggies 996.
Ruggles.
David Ruggles 996. Brian has better eyes, and but he has some questions. We on the EICMA episode last week, we talked about some of the bikes that were more interesting to us. We glazed over one that David Ruggles 996 was really interested in, and that's the CB1000 GT. So I went and did some more research into this bike, and it is a tall rounder. It's a long travel bike. I think it's like 150. No, what was the travel on the front? It was like 110 millimeters of travel on the front. No,
more than that. It was.
I wrote it down.
5 inches, I think. Yeah,
it was 5 inches of travel. We wrote it down in the King's English metric. So it's a tall rounder. It's a higher. It's 150 horsepower. It's the exact same engine that's in the CB1000 Hornet that I got to test with Honda this summer. That motor is a gem. I absolutely love the CB1000. However, in America, and maybe they'll get it fixed for this year, but because we run different fuel and we have different laws here for EPA, the American version is knocked down to, I think, 110 or 120 horsepower.
Pretty soft. There's
already some tuners that have fixed that. But I can say, having ridden the Hornet 1000, that bike was a joy. We were there to test the Hornet 750 and the Hornet 1000. Most of the testers that I was there with really fell in love with the Hornet 750. I liked the Hornet 750, but I loved the Hornet 1000. Yep. That thing, I thought, had Stylema brakes on it. It was really good. So if the GT is based off of that platform, and I have no reason to think, I mean, that's the Honda way, that thing will be incredible because it has a bigger windscreen. It has the same bags as the NT 1100. And if you're not a parallel twin person, if you're an inline four person, I think it's.
And this is, it looked to be, at least on paper, this is like kind of an 80% of a BMW XR.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really great parallel. Looking at it too, it also, styling wise, and we don't really get these inline four sport touring bikes that often anymore. It kind of reminded me of the old FZ1. And if anybody of you out there had an FZ1, they were beloved by all who owned them. They were a really lovely touring platform. They didn't really have luggage, but people put luggage on them. They did rack days on them. They were really a pretty great platform. And it kind of reminds me of that, what I was reading about it. So yeah.
So good catch, David. I think that's an interesting bike.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about
I
that
love
one.
to hear other people excited about sport touring bikes with 17-inch front wheels as much as I am, because I'm a big fan of the 17-inch front wheel.
So we have another one from Zambuki.
A great name.
Yep. And I'm just using your taglines. I don't know your real names. So Zambuki. He had a couple questions. I think these are both great. The first one I want to get into is he has a question about basically engine braking during trail braking coming into a corner. So should you rely on engine braking or account for engine braking, or should you think about using neutral throttle?
So this is a really great question. I think there's so much confusion around this, and it's because a very prominent individual misunderstood another very prominent individual, published a book with their misunderstanding of the one or the other, and it just completely confused the whole trail braking thing. So let's kind of go into this a little bit. This comes up a lot. There's a lot of thinking that says that, or a lot of people who are still thinking based on the misunderstanding, there's so much value. We need to keep some throttle on during the entire cornering phase because it takes the slack out of the drive line. It the way we can talk about squat and pro squat and the way the rotation of the wheels, it actually pushes the rear tire into the ground. It basically raises the rear a little bit, so you get a little bit more cornering clearance. So there was a massive amount of confusion that you should be on the brakes even just a little bit during the braking phase.
Be on the throttle.
Be on the throttle. I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying. And there are very few hard and fast rules in motorcycling, but one of them is we never, ever, 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 ever overlap throttle and front brake. We can overlap throttle and rear brake. There's a lot of places where we can do that. And in fact, that's where the confusion came from, because the person was talking about in the olden days of racing 500cc two-strokes, he would run the rear brake against the throttle as kind of a low buck wheelie control and a low buck traction control. So I think that's part one. We just kind of need to clarify that. Now, as far as if we're not overlapping throttle and front brake into the corner, there's a thinking that we can just engine brake or coast up into the corner. And we can, right? I think a better way to look at it as understand what each tool does so that you can make decisions based on your situation, right? Because the answer to almost every motorcycle question begins with it depends, right? So, when the front brake, right? The front brake by design, this is how motorcycles are designed, causes the motorcycle to want to slow down and change direction, right? Neutral throttle causes the motorcycle to maintain its radius. If we're in a corner, we go to neutral throttle, the line's going to stay the same. And then, of course, acceleration makes the bike stop turning and want to accelerate, right? So we can use each of those tools when we need them, right? On the street, there's all these corners that might be multiple radiuses and they get wide in the middle, or maybe they almost turn into a straightaway and then they tighten again. And there might be a lot of places where you might go to a full-on engine braking, a coast state, go to a neutral throttle state, maybe have to go back to the front brake. We want to just use the tool that we have available to us, right? Yeah.
So on the track, right? So you mentioned that you have all of these different tools. You've got your front brake, you've got your throttle, you can engine brake and just close the throttle and coast, but engine braking in. And the whole it depends thing, I know it feels like a cop-out, like a non-answer, but the reality is it does. And none of these tools are wrong or off limits necessarily. It just all depends on the situation you're in. So to the question, should I consider, because he asked us kind of a follow-up question of like, Should I consider engine braking when I'm trail braking? And I would say you absolutely should.
No,
consider
I think
engine
it's
braking.
part of the whole thing. It's part
Yeah.
of the stability. In fact, we get a lot of students that come in and they've been taught to squeeze the clutch so that they only rely on the front
Right.
brake. And you're giving away a lot of control. Not to mention that when you release the clutch back out, the wheel's going to hop. But engine braking or coasting is an important part of stability. It's an important part of the entire equation.
Yeah.
But on the racetrack, what is like your objective is basically to get to the slowest part of the corner as quickly as you can and then accelerate away from it. So
Yep.
you're just unlikely to be using a much engine braking coasting phase at all.
So we've talked about this once before, but I think it's worth bringing up again. So when you go to the brakes on the track, everything is extremely deliberate on the track. I don't want to say it's aggressive or it's hard. It's just very deliberate, right? At this point, you stop, you close the throttle, and at this point, you apply the brakes and so forth. Everything's very deliberate. We use the engine braking whether we want to or not by just not letting the clutch out or not opening up the throttle, right? So the engine brake is happening when we're in the braking phase. But when you're on the track, you may be braking so hard with the front end on the front tire that the rear tire is hardly doing any work.
Yeah, the rear tire might just be
skimming across barely, right? So when you're setting up the bike for the track, especially for racing, so, and I keep saying racing, but what I mean is if your main priority is your lap time, let's just say that, because some track day guys who don't race are very concerned with these same things. But if that's your goal, you do want engine braking, and you kind of want as much engine braking as you can before you hit the limit of the rear is now locking and sliding and causing instability, or I should say causing too much sliding, because some guys want a little bit. Or you kind of balance that by using the rear brake yourself and controlling some of that input. But there's very few guys who want zero engine braking. In fact, zero engine braking, and a lot of these with these electronic throttles and stuff, you can set up with extremely low to nearly none.
You can program it in, and I think like that was what made Honda's V5 so special. Is one of the bank of three, they would feed a little bit of fuel into it to mitigate engine braking and rear wheel hop.
Yeah, to control it. Yep.
Yeah.
And so you kind of want to find the balance of, am I getting as much rear braking from the engine braking as I can without causing instability, without causing sliding or locking, in order to help me get the bike slowed down? Because if you think about when you're braking with the front tire versus the rear tire, if the rear tire is helping you slow down, it actually kind of keeps you in line to a point, right? It's almost like, imagine putting an anchor out behind you. It actually keeps you fairly in line while it's braking. Again, to a point. If it's so much that it's locking and sliding, now you are losing some stability. But historically, the guys who really liked running extremely low engine braking, it's because they came from a two-stroke background.
Right.
And they're used to a bike that has very, very little, if any, engine braking. And as soon as they had engine braking, it just threw off how they like to ride. So long answer here, but if you're riding a modern 4-stroke engine sport bike, engine braking can help you. You shouldn't try to mitigate it. You definitely shouldn't roll into corners with the clutch pulled in. I would not recommend anybody do that. I don't think there's any scenario.
No, it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. I guess if we're going to throw another hard and fast rule in there is, don't make that your standard approach to a corner. Don't make that your plan.
Right.
I mean, there are situations where I'm going to squeeze the clutch and coast in. Like there was a situation where there was snow.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Right? Like kind of situation. But I think, the bigger question, and I'm going to add on to this because we get another question that's very similar to this. And riders who have these big torquey motorcycles, right? Maybe you have a Ducati V2, you're on a cruiser with a big lumpy V-twin. So many times, engine braking is plenty to slow down to an appropriate entrance speed or a speed where you're comfortable, right? It is still slowing the motorcycle. And to that, I would say, if you're doing that, and I think that's fine in a lot of situations, I do it all the time, you have to be prepared or have the skill set to be able to go to the front brake should you need to. Mm-hmm. The problem isn't necessarily engine braking into corners. The problem is relying solely on engine braking into cornering. Because if that corner tightens up, or if it tightens up and goes downhill, or whatever the case may be, and I'm relying solely on engine braking, what are my options? Do I add more coast? Do I
love that.
Do I add more off throttle, right? So I need to have the skill set and the training and the technique to be able to like, oh, okay, I'm engine braking into this corner. I'm very happy doing this. I'm very comfortable. Oh, it's tightening. I have the skills I need to go to the front brake.
Yeah. And to that, like, big singles, big twins, these things that have a lot of engine braking, and riders who ride these a lot are very used to the engine braking and how it feels coming down, like when speed's starting to lower. You get less effective engine braking the lower the RPMs become. Right. So at really high RPMs, when you just shut off the throttle, you get a lot of engine braking because of how many RPMs you're turning. As you slow down, you get less and less and less engine braking. So just be mindful of that. And that's where, guys who do this a lot, big cruisers, I hear this all the time. I watch this happen. They're going into the corner and they just use a downshift to bring the revs up and get more engine braking, essentially. So just be mindful of that. Like, it's not wrong to do it. Like you said, it's totally fine to do it. And it's appropriate a lot of times just from ease and smoothness. But just be prepared to use the brakes when you need to on the way into a corner in case something surprises you.
Yeah, I think it's like the crux of it is understand what each tool does. And so you can know the tool, right? It was the old Japanese saying that if you only own a hammer, if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem starts to look like a nail.
Right.
And if you're only relying on engine braking or coasting into corners, that's going to work up until the day that it doesn't.
Right.
Now, I think there's another facet of this, and we get this question all the time. I made a whole video about this about a year ago, and that's the rider who wants to trail brake, but they're on a big twin, and they end up overslowing. And so they want to be on the front brake. They understand that when I'm on the front brake, it's pushing the tire into the front ground. I'm getting that bigger contact patch. I get all these advantages from it, but I'm going too slow when I get into the corner. What's your advice to that rider who's struggling with overslowing?
So funny enough, the context I see this exact same thing in is on the track all the time. I have riders that come up that are track riders that are trying to progress and go faster. And when you're entering into a corner and you have no load on the front end, you're basically tipping in off brake. Like you've finished your braking entirely and you're totally off brake when you tip in. It is scary to go much faster than whatever they're comfortable with because it just feels vague. It doesn't feel like you have much grip. Whether you do or don't, it doesn't feel like much.
I always feel like that state I feel like I'm a passenger in those situations.
Very much so.
If I'm not deliberately giving a control, I'm at the mercy of physics.
Right. And that's where my goal with a rider in that spot is, how do I help you carry that 1% of front brake pressure further into the corner, and as you initiate the turn and you start leaning into the corner? How can I help you carry like a percent of brake pressure? And the analogy we always talk about is, think about the amount of front brake pressure it takes to activate the tail light, the brake light, right?
Yeah, that little click
the little click you hear, the little solenoid. Yeah,
old motorcycles.
Yeah,
not only motorcycles.
I don't think the new ones do it anymore, but that's literally as much as we're talking about. Like, enough to drag the pads on the rotor. That's all it takes. That alone will give you enough feel from the front end to come into the corner with more confidence and tell what's going on than just rolling in with nothing on. But in order to get to that, a lot of riders, it's, well, I need to brake later is the thought, right? It's, I need to brake later. I need to brake later. It's like, well, maybe we'll get to that. But what I would suggest you do is just brake lighter from wherever you're comfortable right now, much lighter, and just carry the brake longer and lighter, right, into the corner. So what we're trying to get is at the sort of tip in point of the corner. As you start turning and leaning the bike, you're going just fast enough that you need a little bit of brake pressure to keep slowing it down as you make the initial tip in. And that's the difference. And honestly, I think some people think it's from here to here. No. It's from like here to here.
Yeah.
We're talking 2 or 3 miles an hour difference. It's not massive. And if you can just find that incremental improvement, suddenly you're like, oh, this corner feels great to me now, And on the track, since I'm on the subject of it here, what I often find is riders will say, oh, well, I feel great here, but I feel terrible here, here, and here. And it's, well, my guess is if we had data on your bike, that corner where you're going to the brake and how you're carrying the brake into the corner, you are carrying a little more pressure on the front end as you initiate the turn and start leaning. And the other spots you just aren't. And that's really where the difference is coming from like a confidence perspective. So a little lighter, longer, and just carry the tiny, tiny, tiny bit of pressure on that front brake as you initiate the turn, and it's going to make a huge amount of difference.
Yeah, there's two thoughts I want to add to this. And one is, it's one of my favorite things I like to throw out in our new rider briefing, is that it's an old saying that's the fastest riders use the brakes the most.
Mhm.
And what do you assume most people think that means?
I think most people thinks it means they burn through the brake pads faster.
Right. Or they go to the brakes late, they
Right.
brake hard,
Super
they're
hard,
doing
yeah.
all that thing. What does it actually mean though?
A lot of times it means this rider is going to the brakes and keeping the brakes activated longer.
Right. They're
Not-
carrying the brakes for a long, long time. So here's an actual mechanical thing that can help if you're on a big torquey bike. And I've worked with so many riders, and I say this to them and they'll look at me like I have two heads, and then they'll go do it and they'll be like, oh my gosh, like it just transforms them. If there's a corner that you're struggling with overslowing, what I've discovered is a lot of riders, as they progress as riders, they still downshift where they did as a newer rider, right? So they're like, well, I'm usually in second gear. This is what it feels like when I go into this corner. And they kind of build that muscle memory. But as your skill progresses and now you're trying to do more trail braking, you're going quicker. You don't need to be in second gear. And we're talking about the amount of engine braking you get at that. Try that same corner a gear or maybe even 2 gears higher. Like, still go to the brakes where you normally would, but don't just downshift, right? Like let the engine stay in a higher gear so it forces you to be on that brake, because you still want to control your speed, right? This makes me happy. Like, I'm going to use this to get to my happy place, but it's going to force you to stay with that front brake. And most riders discover two things. Number one is they're going to go through the corner significantly quicker and feel more stable and more confident and more comfortable through the whole thing. The whole corner will just smooth out. And they're going to find, because their skill has progressed so much, they're still going plenty quick to accelerate out on the other side.
Yep.
And if you're not, just downshift
Right.
and then accelerate back out of it. But it's a great technique to kind of get over that. And it's a really great illustration as to how much engine braking really does to slow you down, to go back to the original question.
It can make a huge difference. Yeah. He had a second question on here.
Oh, wow. We're not even done with your question. Wow.
Unrelated topic. I
Okay.
think this is a fun one. His question is, so we ride the track and we do this stuff quite a bit. What are the riding tips or things that people think about or talk about that we just shake our heads at or just disagree with or think, oh, that's such a misunderstanding of what that's supposed to mean? And we hear these at the track. We hear them. I'm
All
sure
the
you
time.
hear them in the comments of your other videos. What are a couple of your favorite ones that come to mind that are these comments that you just kind of roll your eyes at?
All right. Do you have one right off the top of your head?
I want to hear. I know you've got a couple that we talked about prior. Go ahead.
One that I really can't stand this one. You should have no weight on your hands when you're braking into a corner, and that's taught in some places. I don't know how that's physically possible. You just squeeze the tank and like keep all the weight off of your hands.
What was that? It was a 1990s maybe exercise, the Thigh Master.
Oh,
maybe
yeah, just,
people.
like, squeeze.
Maybe they actually have stock in Thigh Master,
Right, or
and
maybe
that's
it's like there's the pads, the grippy pads on the gas tanks.
Yeah.
Maybe it's them trying to like sell more pads. No, you have to have some weight on your hands, and we've talked about this a little bit too, and we can talk about it more. But how you weight your hands makes where you hold on to the handlebars makes a big difference. But under a braking phase, you need to have weight on your arms. Otherwise, you're just going to collapse onto the front of the bike. What's one that you see?
So the one I hear at the track in general is just kind of aggressive language when they're talking about things like hit the brakes, they're like flick it in, like all these things. It's like
snap it, grab, jam, whack the throttle.
I guess why I don't like that is if that's the language you use, even if on track I'm very smooth and progressive and gradual with all my inputs. If you think about it in terms of those words, those aggressive, sharp, fast words, it's going to have a mental trigger for you where you start thinking that or behaving that way on
No,
track
it
too.
absolutely does. There's scientific evidence
Yeah.
that your brain doesn't know the difference. If you always say, and even think of it in this way, you're describing it to a new rider, oh, I just hit the brakes,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You're going to be more likely to hit the brakes, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big one. Like we need to throw a lot of those adjectives out, right? We squeeze the brake, we roll on the throttle, we load the tire,
Yeah.
all these things like that. I got a comment several years ago, and I'm the only one that thinks this is funny, but he went on and on and on about you need to pop your counter twitch, right? And I think it was, snapping counter steers. And there was a school I went to where they taught you went to a piece of tape, you rode up to a piece of tape, and you snapped a counter steers. It was terrifying. Don't do that,
Right.
right? If you look at some of the greatest riders, going back to MotoGP, right? You look at Jorge Lorenzo, Andrea Dovizioso, these guys were glassy smooth.
Yeah.
Right. And teaching new riders for as long as I did, you can get away with some pretty awful technique if you do it smoothly.
Yep. I guess one of the comments that I think about with this, there's two things I think about with this is, do you want people to see you riding and think, oh man, I wish I was as smooth as that guy? Or, oh man, I can't believe how good he's doing considering how rough he is with everything, right? Like try to emulate the thing you want to be known for, and most likely you're going to be that thing, right? So if you want to be the smooth rider that everyone's impressed by, you have to be the smooth person all the time.
Ironically, the smooth rider doesn't always look like they're going fast.
Sometimes it looks very boring. And there was a great, one of my favorite ones was from an announcer, maybe as a journalist, but it was when Lorenzo was really in his peak. And he's watching him at Sepang or at one of the tests, and he's watching him lap after lap after lap, and he's hitting the mark, bang on the money, doesn't miss it by millimeters, right? And it's in a fast transition of a left to a right. And he says, every other rider comes through there and you see him, go from left to right. He says, somehow when I watch Lorenzo do it from the same view of everybody else, I cannot tell when his body goes from the left side to the right side of the bike. It just all of a sudden is there, and it didn't look like anything moved or changed. It just suddenly was in the exact right spot for the next part of the corner. What a great thing to strive for, right? Like none of us are going to be Lorenzo, but what a great target to strive for in terms of, what you're known for.
Yeah, I remember when I was like a new rider, there was a guy who he showed up, and he was just a gifted rider, and he was on a yellow VFR 750 or 800, and his jacket was like all faded, like the red nylon wasn't hardly red anymore, and I remember like watching him go through like a pretty technical section of road, and watching him ride, it looked like it was like he was playing with it. It looked like he wasn't going super fast. He was riding at a pretty reasonable speed, street ride, but the precision with, like, you could tell he was putting the bike exactly where he wanted to, everywhere, every corner. Like that's where he wanted to go, and that's where he put the bike. That level of precision, I think, is so much more valuable than fast, right? And we've talked about this a lot too. Like at the track, everyone gets really obsessed with body posture.
Yeah.
Right. And that's another one. People are like, oh, you'll walk through the pits at any given time, and somebody's going to be coaching somebody else on body posture. And there's people I've worked with for years, and they're wanting to talk about posture, but they still don't hit every apex with precision every lap. And to me, if we're going to talk order of the sport, like that precision is so much more important. If you can hit your apex, right? And we can talk about apexes and entrances and all these other points, but that's far more important.
Yep.
And I think that's another thing with the track advice. We get really hung up on what makes for a good photo.
Right.
And I'll be the first to ham that up, right?
Yeah,
we want to look good in the photo. I understand. But if you want to be quick and you want to be safe, other things need to take the priority.
And I 100% agree. The body position thing is very secondary, I would say, in the order
I'd say
of
it's
things.
tertiary. I mean, there's things like lean equals risk, right? And if we're running at a lean angle and our feet are hitting the ground and stuff like that, okay, now we need to like talk about some of these things. But
and if you took a rider who had good front end feel, good vision, good, kind of had good decisions to make on track, and you basically glued them to sit dead center in the bike, it would affect their overall speed, but not by as much as you might think.
Right.
Right? That's not that big of a limiting factor. The getting off the bike to stand it up sooner and things like that, those make a difference, but they don't make the biggest chunk of difference. The biggest chunk is just, do you have good feel over the front end? Can you brake and turn and steer and get to the middle, get to the apex and get out of the corner correctly? Like all of these much more fundamental things should be everyone's priority, but it is. I see lots of riders get hung up on getting a knee down and looking like Marquez in the photo and all this. And the amount of times where it's like that, not only should that not be it just shouldn't even be on the list of things you're thinking about today. If it happens, it happens, but don't think about it today. It's not going to help you.
Let me tell you another one that makes me really crazy about the track. And it's the mindset or the advice of, what braking marker are you going to? What line are you on? What, like this really rote sequential thing. And I've even seen people say, well, you want to be in turn 3 here, go to breaker marker 2, blah, blah, blah. And I remember like pulling him aside and I was like, well, what bike are you on? Well, I'm on a Gixxer 1000. What bike are you on? I'm on a Ninja 400, right? Those things are going to be very different things, right? And I remember talking to, I can't remember if it was, I think it was Ben or Eric Bostrom, and I asked him, what corner marker are you braking to, or what brake marker you're using?
Yep.
And he goes, there's brake markers out there?
It's not even looking at him.
Not even looking at him. Like, it's not even on his radar. It's not what he's thinking about. And I thought that was really telling.
Mm-hmm. There was one other point that when we talked about with the smoothness and the, not hitting the brakes and so forth. And I watched this happen off track in the pits. And it always reminds me, I watch riders who are messy and hard with their things. They're difficult. They're hard on their tools. They're hard on their truck. They're hard on they're hard on things. And I always think, it always reminds me of that mantra that I've heard is, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? The way you push your bike around the garage, the way you use your tools on the garage. There's a term we refer to as mechanical sympathy.
Yeah.
Right? Are you hard on things all the time? That's going to translate across everything you do, including how you ride. So the more you can think about, can I be deliberate? That doesn't mean you have to be weak or soft. I'm not saying that.
No, because braking, if we talk about braking, it's where we load the tire, and then where a lot of riders kind of fall short is once the tire's loaded, they're not deliberate enough. They don't build enough pressure after that point. So it's not weakness at all or being lazy. It's understanding the progression. Yeah,
but the more you can be conscious of the physics of all of this stuff and like loading into the actual effort of it, everything's going to be smoother. Everything's going to feel better. You're going to get more feedback from the tires and from the bike if you can think about it in that way. So.
And if we're heading into winter, and if you're in a winter state, we are. Winter's a great time to start applying a lot of these ideas to how you're driving your car. Right? You're going to be driving on slip. How are you loading the tires? How are you turning the steering wheel? If you think about the steering wheel as lean angle, right? How are you braking and adding lean angle? How are you braking and turning the steering wheel? You can practice these things year round, no matter what vehicle you're in. And it's going to pay big dividends for you come next spring when you get back on your motorcycle. If you change how you do anything is how you do everything, or how you do everything is whatever. Yeah.
So I try to think about that one with everything. And you make a good point, like driving, using your tools at your day job, whatever it is, just how you interact with things around you it trains you to interact with other things around you. So just think about how much this carries across everywhere you go.
The tools one's an interesting analog because I know some severely gifted mechanics, one of which worked for Ducati. He helped with the development of the 888 and 851 Ducatis back in the day. And you watch him work on the motorcycle, and it's just, everything's deliberate, everything's precise, everything's measured. And man, these simple little things. He never drops a tool into the toolbox. He never just lobs it in. He goes and sets it it
has a place.
It has a place, and he just drop it in. But it didn't take him any extra time. But it probably saves him time on the other end when he goes to pull the tool back out, right? Everything,
Well, and these are the guys who never strip the head of a bolt.
Right.
Right. They're loading into the head of the bolt, and they go, No, that's not right.
And
I need a
feel.
different tool.
We talk about feel a lot, right? Like we get that question a lot. How do I feel the front end? Well, the only way to feel the front end is to kind of ease into that, right? Think about you're loosening or tightening a bolt. If you just put it on, just bonk, there was no feel. But these guys, they're like, oh,
yep, it didn't break free easy.
Oh, okay, there's something. You're right.
So anyway, long answer to your very simple question, but I think it just illustrates how important it is. Like this covers every aspect of what you do in your life, not just how you ride a motorcycle. So.
I think that's part of what makes motorcycles so special is that, in our world anyway, everything kind of relates back to motorcycles. Like, I think we love these things because they are this analog for every aspect of your life. Yeah. Kind of comprised. It's complicated, it's technical, it's simple, but it's not. It's nuanced, it's like it's all these things. It's a brilliant little machine.
Well, and I can tell a lot about so at the track day, right? At a not a race weekend, at a track day. I see this more at track days. At a track day, I can tell an awful lot about the rider by how they maintain their pit area.
100%. Yeah.
If I show up and your gloves are just flopped out and the Velcro's undone and your helmet's here and your boots are here and they're undone and your chain's filthy and
then when they load their bag up, they just roll the leather
just
suit
jams
into a
in
ball
there
and pack it in.
I can, without a doubt, guarantee that you are not going to be the Lorenzo on track. I'm positive of that.
Yeah, there's something really satisfying about stopping yourself.
Yeah.
And being meticulous, like it's like the guy throwing the tool into his toolbox. You might be saving a half a second here, but it might be costing you 3 seconds over there.
Yeah.
Right? How much time does it take you to like fold your suit in nicely and roll it up and zip the zippers back up so it doesn't get all wrinkled and deformed? So when you pull it out next time, the arm's twisted and the leather dried into a weird position. No, everything's nice. It saves you time.
And all of the riders I know who have done this for a long time and are meticulous and are tidy and everything, those guys are around for a long time.
Right.
They tend to stick around for a long time because they've got a process and a system. They think these things through and they make life easier for themselves by, again, now I feel like I'm your dad telling you how to
clean your room.
You need to go clean your room and make your bed and whatever. But it's true. It all makes a difference. And the more you can make life easier for yourself in these little places, the more energy and focus you have in the other places. So.
Our good friend Mike, I know he didn't come up with it, but he says it all the time. But I just find it so, I really enjoy it. But he's like, I'm doing this for future me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like I'm doing these little things for future me. And it's like nice to do nice things for yourself.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. I think it's enough of that.
Boy, we covered that question ad nauseum. We may not ever get to another question. What
I've got one more, which I think is a fun one. So,
and I have one too. So
at Name Freeze asks,
great name, another great name. I love these names.
Asks, really interested in your explanation of suspension upgrades in more detail. Like step 1, get spring rate for your weight. Step 2, get cartridges. And then he says in parentheses, whatever that means, which I love because we mentioned when we talked about this
jargon,
jargon, right? And we said, oh yeah, I would just get a cartridge for it, move on. And I'm sure some riders are like, cartridge, what does that mean?
Printer?
Yeah. So I think we could probably go a little bit into detail on that. But yeah, kind of jargon in general. There's lots of terms, and we'll try to call that out more on the podcast.
We're going to try to be, it's so hard. We've been doing it for so long. I think we're completely blind to it.
Yeah. Don't even think about it. Yeah.
Like to me, like you say cartridge, I automatic, but let's answer what a cartridge is. Let's go there first.
So in the progression of suspension setup, right? Again, number 1 and cheapest is just make sure you've got the correct springs on the bike.
Well, before that, set preload.
So
let's talk about preload real quick.
So fair point. So depending on your weight, so the bike showed up and the bike has some springs on it, front and rear, right? The forks have springs and the shock has a spring. That's what's suspending the bike. Depending on the weight you're putting on the bike, so i.e. your weight or you in a passenger, luggage, whatever, is going to change how much you're loading into that suspension. Now, we typically want like 25 to 30% preload. Every bike is a bit different, so go look up what the recommendations are. But
let's back up just a quick second because I think this is an important distinction. Preload is we preload the spring, we put a amount of tension into it, and preload doesn't make it stiffer. Preload just changes how much energy it takes before the spring starts to move. So if the bike's heavy, right? You put saddlebags on it, or your significant other gets on the back seat. You've added more weight to it. So now there's more energy causing that spring to initiate its movement. So we can add or take preload out so it moves more appropriately. It sits at the right height within the travel of the fork, right? So if a fork travels 100 millimeters, 25% of that would be 25 millimeters, because I'm good at math. Did you catch that?
Nailed it, Dave. Nailed it.
Good at math.
So, and I may have misspoke. I might have said preload. What I meant was sag. So we're kind of aiming for a certain target of sag, static sag, which is just the rider on the or sort of the ride of the loaded sag is just the rider on the bike. We adjust that for the springs you have by increasing or decreasing the preload. So preload, so on the shock is the easiest way to see it. There's a collar that as you tighten it on the threads, it compresses or preloads the spring to basically make the spring shorter.
Right.
So that is the preload.
More energy pushing the back of the bike back up.
And what that means is, so most springs on most bikes are, let's assume it's a linear rate, meaning if it's
more jargon, straight rate versus progressively wound.
Yeah. So a linear rate means it doesn't, by the nature of the spring's design, it doesn't progressively get stiffer as it goes. It's the same rate, meaning 10 pounds of travel creates, 10 pounds of load creates this much travel. Another 10 pounds creates the next amount of travel, right, into the compression of the spring.
And you can see really quick if your rear shock, if you go look at your rear shock, if it's a straight rate, linear rate, or progressive, if some of the coils are really close together and then they get really far apart, the coils that are really close together are going to move very easily. The coils that are really far apart are going to be harder to move. So the theory is with the progressive spring is that it's going to give you really good small bump absorption. It's going to feel really plush initially, and then it gets stiffer as you go.
Yeah. Now, you typically only see this on either big travel bikes or off-road bikes, typically. You don't really see this on street bikes too often, I don't think.
No, I think a lot of bikes.
Oh, do you?
Yeah,
okay.
No. Most of the bikes that I've tested the last couple of years have a progressively wound spring on the rear.
On the rear,
and
which makes sense.
I can't see what's in the fork. I would imagine they're progressively round fork.
So that's step one, is you try to set the preload so the sag is in the window that it's supposed to be in for you. Now, why I said step one is make sure you have the right springs is if you're trying to adjust the preload to get it to sit in the right sag window for you, you may find that you can't get it into the right sag window. Right.
On my Aprilia, 0 preload, I still don't have anywhere near enough sag on the rear.
It was too stiff
of a spring.
So that's when you would go drop down and go to a softer spring, right? Or other way around, if you're too big for it and you can't get the preload right without cranking it all the way down.
You crank the preload all the way up, and then you sit on it and it still sags way too much. You're limiting your suspension travel because those coils are going to hit each other. This is part of why I don't like progressively wound springs, because you'll blow through that initial soft spot right off the bat. And then you'll need a stiffer spring so that it sits at that 25% of travel.
Yeah, so that's why I say make sure you have the right springs. And when you're doing that, it's obviously first you check to see if you can get the sag correct.
What's crazy is almost every motorcycle, if you can get the sag within the window, right? And it's a window. You're not going to get it perfect. It's not going to be, it's a range. How much your bike will behave and handle better just by setting sag.
Yeah. Now, the reason why that matters is then if you think about the bike riding along, if let's say the front, so imagine my hand's a bike for a second. Imagine we're going this direction. If the front is too stiff, but the rear is too soft, and the bike does this statically, that's not the right geometry for that bike. It wants to sit in a certain orientation for swing arm angle and all kinds of other things, right? If the spring's too soft or if the spring's too stiff, it won't sit in the right part of the stroke. It isn't going to behave very well for you. It's going to be very harsh. It's not going to ride very well. So step one, get the preload and the sag set correctly for your weight if you can. If you can't, get the right springs so you can. So that's step one.
And it's, again, that'll solve 90% of people's suspension problems without getting into a cartridge.
So a cartridge. So your forks have internally the damping system inside the forks. It's a cartridge. So if
you watch the video that I just put out, that's things that made motorcycling better. I have a whole section there where I show cartridges. I have like 5 or 6 video shots in the middle of that about cartridges. You can see them.
A great visual explanation of it, but effectively it is how we do shim stacks and valving and so forth to control the movement of fluid within the fork, which is how we control the damping. So if we had no damping in the fork, you would just be sitting on a spring and you would just be pogoing like an old Cadillac everywhere you went.
Yeah, damping is just controlling the oscillation, the frequency of an oscillation, right? So if we damp it, we're slowing down, right? Your uncle, who's arguing about politics right now, he probably has no damping left in his Cadillac springs.
Right.
So when he stops, it just does this. There's nothing, it just bounces up and down. There's nothing controlling that oscillation.
Yep. So that's what the cartridge system is basically the entire internals of the fork can come out and then it gets reshimmed, revalved, adjusted however it needs to. And the whole thing goes back in as a cartridge system, back into the fork. Then you put the fluid in, the spring in and all that and reassemble it. But when we say cartridge, we're meaning a fork cartridge. And these are typically cartridge kits from GP Suspension or Öhlins or K-Tech or all manner of different companies that make these things. That's what we say when we're saying cartridge. On the rear, you can revalve a rear shock. That does happen. Guys will revalve and shim rear shocks rather. Oftentimes, you just end up replacing a rear shock though. Whereas a fork, you don't typically replace the fork altogether itself. You just do a cartridge if you have to. If you're trying to improve the performance of the shock for whatever you're after, a lot of times you will just replace the shock altogether.
Right. It's just easier and faster and ultimately cheaper because, so I went through this with the KTM 390. Mm-hmm. It had a non-adjustable fork in it. I bought cartridge kits. I think they were Malosi's. Does that sound right? No, that's not the name. It's the company that they own Öhlins, and they do these really affordable cartridge kits.
Somebody in the comments will correct us. Don't
worry.
Don't you worry.
It's just on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, it completely transformed that motorcycle. It turned a very budget fork into a very high-end fork. I think the cartridge kit was like $300 and just transformed the motorcycle. I didn't even change the springs. The springs were correct. The damping was what was wrong.
Yep. So when we talk about suspension, that's kind of the order that we would talk about those things in, is you're addressing the problem. So beyond springs, at that point, if you're going to adjust anything else, it's going to be because you're trying to get a performance advantage in some area or something's not behaving how you want it to and you need it to behave differently. That's when you would upgrade or get into these more expensive things. Shocks, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500.
There's some really great companies out there. Wilbur's is a company that's not very known in America. They make extraordinary rear shocks for a really great price. It's what's on Mrs. CanyonChasers motorcycles. So you can get them like relatively reasonably priced. I think the bigger issue is so many people will go chase suspension problems, starting with the most expensive thing first. Right. And it's the same thing when you're diagnosing. Always start with the cheap component, right? It's more likely the 30-cent part broke, not that the $1,000 part broke. So people will go buy cartridge kits. They'll go buy a rear shock. They never set the sag.
Right.
They never set the preload.
Yeah.
They never got the correct spring.
With that, if you're considering suspension upgrades on your bike, I wouldn't be afraid to look at used components.
Right.
Because a used shock, so long as it's not damaged, and typically they're not, it's pretty hard to damage
a
shock.
name brand shock can be rebuilt. Most of your OEM shocks cannot.
Right.
Even like on my Aprilia, it has like the Öhlins, whatever. I don't think that rear shock is rebuildable. I would have to buy a replacement for that rear shock. Yeah. Whereas, and here's another important thing that I can't believe we missed this. Your fork oil needs to be changed at least every 2 years. When was your fork oil changed? It is oil, it breaks down. So again, if you're having damping issues before you buy a cartridge kit, get them serviced, put fresh fork oil in them.
Yep. Totally agree. Like for a race bike that sees less than 1,000 miles a year, it's definitely less than 1,000 miles a year. I send off the suspension, the fork, and the shock every year to get serviced.
Yeah, you're riding at a higher level than I do. I'm still on a 2-year cycle.
Well, but even then, like, it's not worth the risk of a seal going bad or the minimal drop in performance that it might see by being too old. If you're going to invest that much to go racing anyway, it would be foolish to go cheap and not just get the thing serviced more often.
You know, you said last episode that you work with Fuzzy. We should call Fuzzy and see if he would come on the podcast. I'll bet you he would love to explain these things better than us.
And he'll do a way better job than we will. Anyway,
because we're on the consumer end of this.
Yeah, he's who we go for to ask these questions.
We could talk to Fuzzy and have him.
We'll hit him up and see if he's up for it. I think he might be into that. It'd be fun. So,
and let us know if that's something you'd be interested in. If you're not, we won't waste Fuzzy's time. But I think you guys would really appreciate it, because I remember the first time I learned about suspension and learned how to identify in my brain the difference between a compression damping issue versus a rebound damping issue, how to feel these things, and then how to adjust and tune those things. Because if you do have like a mid-tier or a higher tier bike that might have adjustable suspension, you know, you can start playing with if you know what you're doing, you can play with those and dramatically affect or improve how your motorcycle feels. Fuzzy would be a great person to talk to.
Yeah, we'll see if we can't bring him on. You had one more question?
I did. I actually compiled a couple questions that we get all the time, and I thought it'd be fun to go through this, because some of these questions, the predominant answer on the internet, I don't necessarily think is correct. Might be correct for some people, but it's not going to be. I would like to address these in kind of a more nuanced way. And
we promised everybody a non-controversial way to spend their time, and here you are.
We're gonna start going into nuance, and it depends. And the number one question we get all the time, and I've made a couple videos on this, is which bike is right for me, right? And this comes from like newer riders, and you know, they get so much advice on how to choose which bike is right for them. And I remember when I was going through this, and people would always be like, well, you got to get a short bike. You got to get a small bike. You got to get this kind of bike or that kind of bike. And my answer, I mean, there's two kind of people I think that are shopping for motorcycles. One is they have a picture in their head of what they want the experience to be. And I think you need to be honest with that, right? If you really love the idea of the cruiser thing, or you really love the idea of a sport bike thing, or the adventure bikes are just calling to you and you want to ride across Morocco, follow that. By all means, follow that. Now, the harder question is, you have no idea.
Right, yeah.
You have no idea what that is. And to that person, I would say to get either, I think like naked sport bikes, UJMs, Universal Japanese Motorcycles, just kind of your standard naked.
We would call it a naked now.
Well, we would call a naked bike now, like like the Hornet 750 that we were just talking about, or a KTM Duke 390. Trying to think of some other ones. The MT 07 or the MT 03.
Well, and yeah, like the KTM line of Dukes are all kind of falls into this category, right?
Right.
The only one I would probably exclude from like a suggesting first rider would be like the 1290.
No, and that gets us into the next question. And the predominant advice that's all over Reddit is you got to start on like a 250 or a 350. And to that, I would say it depends. If you live in Europe, I think that's completely feasible and reasonable. If you live in India, that's a big bike, you know?
Yep.
But if you live in America, and especially if you live in the West like we do, a 350 just isn't going to cut it. You basically, the freeways here, people are going 90 miles an hour, right? And there's going to be a safety risk where if you can't keep up with the flow of traffic, or you can't accelerate the way the Dodge Ram is accelerating, you're putting yourself at risk.
Yep.
And so I think there's like a balancing point. Like I really love the 400s. Most people who come to me and they ask me about a motorcycle, I'm recommending like a 650 twin, right?
Yep.
Like the Ninja 650, not the 600, the 650. And that gets into like the displacement versus how displacement is a little bit confusing. Do you want to talk about that a minute? Like a four-cylinder 600 versus a parallel twin 650, why they're so different?
I guess the biggest thing is to think about is, now we're going to have a really long conversation on the podcast. The biggest thing to think about is the way that thing makes power. So I'll give you a good example. If you take that Ninja 650 twin, right, it's a parallel twin, or the Ninja 636, which is almost the exact same size in terms of cc's, but it's a 4-cylinder. That Ninja, that 636, that inline 4-cylinder, that thing revs to nearly 16,000 RPMs, right? It's going to make well over 100 horsepower, whereas that 650 parallel twin probably going to rev to 10-ish, 10,000 RPM, 9, something like that. Probably makes half that power, maybe a little more, maybe 70 horsepower.
And why
right?
is that? Why does the parallel twin of the same size make half the power?
Well, and so this is probably a great engineering explain type video, but the way that we calculate horsepower is basically the torque that's being generated times the RPM divided by 5252.
Why 5252?
Because that's the formula we cooked up. That's the formula we cooked up.
5250 was Van Halen, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's just the formula that we use for American horsepower. Horsepower can be translated to watts, right? For like electricity. So like it is literally just a measurement of the power that can be generated. So these smaller engines that rev really high, they can have really high horsepower numbers, but very low torque numbers. But it's because they can rev so high that they make so much power.
Well, and that's a factor of 4 cylinders, right? Or
Right.
not 4 cylinders, 4 strokes. 4 strokes generate power through RPM, roughly.
Well, and the 4 cylinders tend to be able to rev up very high because they are very small cylinders, right? If it's a 600 and I've only got 4 cylinders, they're tiny little pistons. I can spin the heck out of those things. The stroke in the cylinder. Now let me explain this again. So a piston has 2 main dimensions, or a cylinder rather has 2 main dimensions. We talk about the bore, which is the diameter of that piston, smaller or bigger. And then the stroke is the depth that the length that it travels inside the cylinder, right? So from bottom dead center to top dead center, that's your stroke. The limiting factor on how fast you can spin an engine is typically the speed, or it's actually the acceleration of the connecting rod that we're going to force it to go through as it goes through this. Stroke directly relates to how the speed of the piston's going to see, right? Is based on the stroke and how fast the connecting rod's going to have to go in order to keep up. What happens is if you over rev one of these things, it'll literally just start coming apart. And so you'll have a bottom end failure, a connecting rod failure. The other limiting factor would be valve float or valve springs, because they're only going to be good for a certain speed. But modern springs, you have to rev like crazy to actually hit the limit of those things.
Well, let me give a real simple example that might help explain it. If you look at a Harley Davidson engine, right? It's a V-twin. The pistons, the fins, they are really long. That's a really long stroke, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you think about the energy it takes to get that piston moving. It has to stop the piston at the top and it has to pull it back down. And then it has all this time to generate speed. And then as it gets to the bottom, it has to stop it and then get it to change direction and go again. So that's your long stroke. And so that's going to create, in very simple terms, it's going to be a very torquey feel. Whereas you look at a race engine, right? They'll sometimes say it's square or over square, where the diameter of the piston is roughly the same as the stroke.
Yeah, that would be square.
It'd be square, right? And then over square is where the
bore is larger.
The bore is larger in the stroke, so it's not traveling very far. So the amount of energy it takes to stop the piston at the top, get it to change direction, and then again at the bottom is much less than that big, heavy coffee can that's moving up and down. Instead, we have a little shot glass.
That's a great explanation. And that's really the limit of how high these things can rev. That's why a longer stroke engine is just going to rev lower in general, right? Now, the caveat of that is the long stroke basically means you have more torque on the crank. So as that piston is coming down, the connecting rod to the crankshaft has more offset from the center line of the crankshaft. So it has more torque as it spins the crank. That's why we say these long stroked engines have more torque, because they do literally generate more torque, right, from the engine itself. So probably way more detail than we needed to go into.
I think it's an important distinction.
But this is a podcast, so here we are.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important distinction to understand how it makes power, right? And if we're going to really simplify it, you think about, if you're a newer rider and you have to spin the thing up to 10,000 RPMs before it starts to make power, that's going to be a little bit unnerving.
Right.
It's going to go, yeah, and then it's going to take off and it's going to freak you out. Whereas the Ninja 650, where it's more torquey, you can just let go of the clutch at idle and it'll basically just start moving. Yeah. And it's a much calmer experience, right? And then as you progress, you can decide what you like. Do I like that? Yeah.
Well,
Or,
and with that more mid-range torque, the torque is more in the usable window of speed for you, right? Like the main torque on like the meat of that power band is 5,000-6,000 RPMs. That's where you live on the street,
right.
right? You don't take your sport bike in, well, hopefully you don't, but you don't go screaming around at 14,000 RPMs everywhere you go on the street. It's going to be pretty exhausting if you do. But that's where they make all their power. So even though that thing makes 100 horsepower, it only does it at the very top end.
Right. And so you got to spool it up. You feel like you're dancing on the shifter.
Yeah.
So this question actually came from someone who was considering a Ninja 400 4-cylinder. And I love that motorcycle.
The ZX4? Yeah.
Yeah, that thing is phenomenal. And he goes, well, I'm going to get a 400 because it's smaller and whatever. And I was like, well, how do you want to ride it? Well, I want to commute. And I want to go to school. And I want to get back and forth from here to there. And I was like, get the Ninja 650. Because the lower torque is going to be easier for you to move through traffic. And he had dirt bike experience.
Yeah.
He's ridden dirt bikes. He's had bikes. I'm like, you don't need that little teeny engine. The little teeny engines are really great for somebody who has absolutely no experience.
Right.
And you want them to be on something that maybe makes 15, 20 horsepower, right? But if you have some base of experience, or if you're a grown-up, right? You have a house. You have a stable job. You don't... you can be trusted with maybe 80 horsepower.
Right.
Your frontal lobe is already developed.
Right. You understand consequences. Yeah.
And then, to that person, you don't need to start on a 30 horsepower motorcycle. You're an adult. You're going to make adult decisions.
Yeah.
Mostly.
So anecdotally, I used to work at a dealership years and years ago, and we did have small bikes. We had 300s and things like that, smaller engine bikes. And we would have new people come in, and they were like, well, I'm thinking about this and that and the other. If it was a younger, smaller person, I would oftentimes steer them toward the smaller street option.
That gets me to the third part of this question.
But if the guy shows up and he's,
6'2"?
Yeah, if he's a big guy, if he's 200 pounds, if I put him on 300, he's going to be back here in 3 weeks and being like, I guess I got to trade it in and get something bigger now.
My knees hurt.
Yeah,
like it barely gets out of its
I can barely
own way.
get going. Yeah. So there is something to that isn't just like, oh, get the smallest, slowest thing you can because it's safer. Yeah, but it's at the end of the day, you need to have fun too, otherwise you're going to quit.
Yeah, the answer is it always depends. And that was the third part of the question that I thought was actually the most important one, which how much bike is too much bike? Like, and how does my size affect that? Now, I'm not especially big. I am 5'7" when I was 23, and I stood up straight and tall, right?
Yeah.
So I'm probably not that tall anymore. So I have a 30-inch inseam. And I remember when at the early stages, I was told that you need to be able to buy something that you can flat foot with both feet and your knees slightly bent. And if that was the case, I would still be hoping to someday graduate out from a Rebel 250.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So like you were talking about the size of a motorcycle based on a big person versus a smaller person. But I work with a lot of really amazing women riders who are smaller than me, and they slay.
Yep.
They're unbelievably talented, and they have a shorter inseam than I do.
Right.
So it's a complicated question. How much bike is too much bike? How much bike is too big? How much engine's too big? Right?
So to that, my wife is, we'll call her 5'2". That's slightly generous, but we'll call her 5'2". She's not tall. She's pretty small in general. She has never had a bike where she could flat foot on both feet ever. I literally don't think there's a single bike available that she
can. She flat foot the Ovale?
No, she can't.
Right.
Yeah, she can't flat foot her Ovale that she rides at the kart track. So she's never had that as an option. So like that almost falls into the earlier question we answered of like myths that we would wish people would stop saying. Like,
right, yeah.
Stop saying that. It doesn't matter as much as you think it does.
Yeah.
If you're a smaller rider and you are going to have to figure out how to like kind of side saddle to get a foot down solid, and you're going to have to play a little bit of games and juggle, and it's not perfect. It's not great, but it is what it is. Otherwise, you're just not going to get to ride anything. So what I'm saying is it can work, and you just have to make some accommodations and be willing to be able to handle that. She right now rides her track bike is an RS 660, which has been a great bike for her. She has a ton of fun on it. She absolutely cannot flat foot that bike, not even close. But it works for a track bike. She rides a dirt bike. She absolutely cannot flat foot a dirt bike. I can't flat foot my 300. I can't flat foot, not even close. So you make do with these things. Like, just get that out of your mind as a requirement, I guess. So,
this really, tell us if you want this. I know a good friend of mine, Haley. I don't know if she's listening, but if she is, we should ask her. She is a professional motorcyclist. She's not especially tall. And maybe get your wife on here, who is also a very phenomenal rider.
Yep.
And maybe we could talk about like big tips for short riders. Like, is that something that you guys would be interested in? Let us know in the comments. I think that would be a compelling, because I'm not especially tall, but nor am I the expert on riding super tall bikes. The Aprilia that I just rode back from California, if you haven't watched that video, you got to go watch that video. That video is great. But that thing had like a 36, 37-inch seat height.
This is a Touareg Rally.
The Touareg Rally. Yeah. It's a 37-inch seat, and I have a 30-inch inseam. So there's a 7-inch discrepancy, right? And I rode that thing. I put 2,000 miles on that thing in a week, from mountain passes, off-roading in Moab. Mm-hmm. There are techniques to get you through that. Yep. Are they always not scary? No, sometimes they're very, very scary. Like, I've almost dropped that bike a bunch of times, but I didn't. But there's techniques that you use to get through those situations. And if you're interested in those, let us know.
Well, so on this topic, I think we've covered, like, don't be scared of getting a bike that's maybe you aren't flat-footed on.
Yeah,
right?
I've never flat-footed anything.
Yeah, so let's get over that. What is the limit? So if I'm a new rider, if I'm coming back to the sport, what would you say is, let's not put you on that. That one probably is too much to start off on.
So people always look at CC, and like, as we were just discussing with the engine thing, I think CC is kind of irrelevant. What I'm always looking at is the weight of the motorcycle, the mass, and then the horsepower, or however much power it puts out. And depending on your experience, your comfort, your confidence, kind of the threshold that I would want to put a newer rider on would be like the 60 horsepower range, but in the 400 pound-ish range. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm actually, this is a tricky question, I think, is because if I think about, let's say you're a returning rider, right? You're the guy who rode dirt bikes as a kid but hasn't for 20 years, and you're coming back. What is the bike that if you came to us and said, "Oh man, I really love this thing," would I be like, "Oh man, can I convince you to try this thing over here instead?"
Well, the bike that always terrifies me when people come up is when they're like, "I want an S1000R," or "I want a Pikes Peak," and you're like, "That's
a lot.
200 horsepower."
That's an awful
but it has
lot.
power modes. It does, but it's like, you make one mistake with the throttle, you've now broken the sound barrier.
They're extremely fast.
Yeah, they're a razor's edge. Now, I love them, and like, there's way you can absolutely get away with it. Rain mode has saved many lives, I think, over the years. But I think ultimately it slows down your return to the sport. It slows down your growth and your progression, and I think ultimately it hampers the enjoyment of the experience when you're absolutely terrified of the thing that's between your knees.
So the one I see, typically the scenario that I see is the guy who's re-entering the sport, and he wants to get a bike because he has a couple of friends or acquaintances that he knows that have bikes, and they've already got one of two things. They've already got either a GS 1300.
Oh, the big adventure
or
bikes.
They've got a big Harley.
Yeah.
Right, a full, bagger and all that stuff Harley. And they go, "Well, I can't show up on the Sportster with my buddies.
I can't show up on the Transalp."
Yeah. And so there's this almost like peers kind of pressure.
I hate that.
Yep.
I hate that. And I'll be honest with you, like, when there are the two hardest motorcycles I think to ride, and I'm going to be objective here, for my size, are both the GS 1300 or 1250 Adventure. Those things are overwhelming. They are hard to ride. Or any full dress Harley. They weigh so much. They are so tall. They are so hard to manage. Regardless of the power, I'm comfortable with the power. But those things freak me out every time I have to ride them. Every time I have to stop in a parking lot or try to get them turned around at a gas station, it's stressful for me.
Right.
I can't imagine a new rider trying to start off unless you're 6'8" and your name is Thorsten, and
Right.
and like you bench press sheep for
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Like
Yeah, if I think genuinely, if you are a large human in the first place, these are much less of an issue because even a big bike doesn't feel that big for that person,
Right.
right? But I guess my thought is, if you've got that adventure off road crew that runs the one piece suit zip ups,
the Aero Stitch,
and they all have the adventure GSs and all that stuff. If you go show up on the 800 GS or the 450 GS or one of the smaller GSs, you are going to feel out of place within that group.
If you have good friends, they will make you feel welcome.
But if you're willing to look outside of the line and you can make the argument of like, well, no, I went and got the Touareg Rally because that's more my speed, or I went and got the Honda Africa Twin, or there's other things that fall into that category that are unique. It's no longer apples to apples is my point, right? They're not gonna be like, oh, you got the little one, did you? Like you can kind of mitigate that by being like, well, no, I'm into this thing, right? So don't be afraid of getting slightly outside the norm. You don't have to go buy the same thing that everybody else has.
And I got to stress this, like you got to go with what's interesting to you. Yeah, maybe all your buddies ride GSs and you're like, that does not sound at all appealing to me. And you'll find different friends. That's one thing that's beautiful about, not that your GS friends are not worthy of your time. Maybe
it sounds like Dave doesn't like GS riders. That's what I heard. Yeah.
But if that's not where your heart is, like really, like, and maybe it is. And if it is, that's great. And like the Touareg 660 is the Transalp, these things are incredibly capable machines. And in a lot of cases, if you're off-road, you're going to have a better time than the guys on the 1250s and 1300s on the midways. I don't understand anybody. I mean, people have way more skill than me off-road, but like 60 horsepower off-road is an insane amount of horsepower off-road. And I don't understand needing 180 in dirt. 180 horsepower. So like follow your heart. Make motorcycling is an individual sport that's often done collectively. But you really, it's your ass in the seat. It's when it comes to choosing a motorcycle, I often make the joke, it's like asking advice on what kind of underwear you should buy. Well, you wear boxers, so clearly boxers are the best choice. Well, I wear sport briefs. No, sport briefs are terrible. Who wears sport briefs, right? You got to like find what works. It's your ass in the seat. It's your ass on the line. Find what works for you.
I think that's it.
Yeah, since we ended on underwear.
Yeah, there we go. That's how we like to end these episodes.
We like talking about your butt.
But this was an awesome conversation. I love answering your questions. I love seeing the questions that you guys actually care about and want to talk about. I think we've got some ideas for some future things to bring on some guests. I think that'll be fun.
I hope we didn't get too complicated or too into the weeds on some of these things. Please give us feedback. Like I said, we do these for you. If there's something you thought we could do better with this one, this was a little different because we didn't have MotoGP to fill up half of the thing.
Right, yeah.
I mean, our primary objective was to distract you from your uncle talking about politics. And
hopefully we did that.
Hopefully, he can, whatever he...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, don't think about him anymore.
Let's start focusing on motorcycles, something that really matters.
Yeah. But yeah, keep giving us questions. Love answering them. We'll try to answer everybody that we can. And then I guess we'll see you next week.